Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you are the kind of person who loves discovering how the world actually works.
The hidden science behind the stuff we interact with every day.
Exactly. Or in this case, the things we smell every single day. You are in exactly the right place. We treat you like the smart friend you are. We're going to get into some genuinely surprising science today. But we promise to skip the dry academic jargon.
Yeah, no textbooks here.
Right. So today we are exploring a universally beloved practice that has been around for, literally thousands of years. Burning incense and Bukhoor, which is traditional Arabian incense.
It is truly a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Whether someone is using it for deep meditation or as part of a sacred religious ritual or just to make their home smell incredibly welcoming for guests, burning aromatic wood and resins is just deeply, deeply embedded in human culture.
It does smell amazing.
Oh, it smells incredible.
But we have to ask the practical question, right? What is it actually doing to the air we breathe?
Right.
So, to figure that out, we have brought a massive stack of sources to the table for today's mission.
A very tall stack.
Yeah, it really is. We are looking at a brand new 2024 meta-analysis on lung cancer in Asia. We also have this huge cardiovascular study out of Singapore that followed over 63,000 people over several decades.
Which is a massive sample size.
It's huge. Plus, a pediatric asthma survey from Oman and some truly cutting-edge laboratory research on human lung cells in mice from the UNC Gillings School of Global Public Health. Oh, and alongside some data from the journal Scientific Reports.
It is a dense and highly comprehensive stack of research. And our goal today is to basically synthesize all of it for you. We're going to uncover the surprising chemistry of incense smoke, look at how it physically impacts our lung cells at a microscopic level, and ultimately figure out how to balance these beautiful cultural traditions with...
Yeah, exactly. It's just wood chips, some tree resins, maybe some floral oils. So lay the foundation for us. When someone lights a piece of Bukhoor, what exactly are they burning?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the word natural does not necessarily mean simple, and it certainly does not mean safe to inhale.
Right.
Bukhoor and incense are highly complex chemical mixtures. You usually start with a base of wood chips, very commonly, things like agar wood or sandalwood. Then those chips are heavily soaked in essential oils, natural resins like frankincense or myrrh, musk, and amber, and sometimes chemical binders are used to hold it all together in a paste or form it into a stick.
So it's essentially a heavily manufactured little block of fragrance. But wait, if the wood is just smoldering and it's not actually catching on fire, how does it stay lit for hours? Are people constantly relighting it?
That slow smolder is actually the crux of the entire issue. Incense is intentionally designed for incomplete combustion. Because it is not bursting into a bright, hot, open flame, it releases a much denser aerosol of particulate matter, or PM. When scientists run this smoke through gas chromatography, they have identified over 850 distinct chemical entities drifting through the air.
850.
Over 850. And out of that massive chemical cocktail, 42 of those entities are known carcinogens.
That is wild. I think when anyone hears about inhaling a complex cloud of carcinogens, the brain immediately jumps to cigarettes. Did any of these researchers actually compare the physical smoke from incense directly to tobacco smoke?
They did, and the numbers from the laboratory data are honestly staggering. If you look at the raw physical output, a single cigarette produces about 10 milligrams of particulates per gram burned. Incense, on the other hand, produces about 45 milligrams of particulates per gram burned.
45.
45, yeah.
That is more than 4 times the physical particle output of a cigarette.
Exactly. The emission rates tell a similar story. A burning cigarette emits roughly 0.7 to 0.9 milligrams of particulates per minute into the surrounding air. Bukhoor emits about 5.9 milligrams per minute. It is pumping out a significantly higher volume of physical, inhalable particles into your environment.
And it seems like it would get even more intense when we look at how Bukhoor is traditionally burned in a lot of homes, right? You don't just hold a match to the wood itself and let it sit there.
No, you don't. Traditionally, Bukhoor is placed directly on top of a glowing disc of white-hot charcoal.
The charcoal, right.
The charcoal is the engine that keeps the wood smoldering for such a long time. But adding charcoal to the mix amplifies the toxicity immensely. The burning charcoal emits huge amounts of carbon monoxide.
How much carbon monoxide are we talking about?
Well, in fact, the carbon monoxide levels in a closed room burning Bukhoor can rival what you would find sitting inside a crowded shisha or hookah lounge.
You're kidding.
I'm not. And alongside the carbon monoxide, that Charcoal is off-gassing nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and heavy metals like cadmium and lead.
Heavy metals from the wood.
Yes, they are naturally sequestered in the wood and released as metal oxides when heated to that extreme temperature by the charcoal.
Honestly, lighting a puck of chemical charcoal inside a closed-up living room feels a bit like deciding to host a barbecue on your coffee table.
Let's bring this right into a typical indoor space. Did the studies measure what the air quality actually looks like inside a home during this process?
They measured it meticulously. When Bukhoor is burned on charcoal in a standard-sized room, the levels of PM 2.5.
And those are the microscopic ones.
Right, the ultrafine particles, small enough to penetrate deep into your lungs and cross directly into your bloodstream. The levels of those spike dramatically. They can reach between 500 and 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter.
Which means what exactly in terms of safety?
To put that into perspective, that is up to 60 times higher than the World Health Organization's safety guidelines for indoor air quality.
60 times the safe limit.
Up to 60 times, yes.
So if a single room is holding up to 60 times the safe limit of these microscopic particles, what on earth is happening to our lung tissue when we sit there breathing it in? To really understand that, we have to zoom into the cellular level. The data from the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health is incredibly revealing here. They placed human lung cells in a specialized environmental chamber and exposed them to United Arab Emirates incense smoke.
Okay. And what did the cells do?
The resulting inflammatory response in those human lung cells was virtually identical to the inflammatory cascade triggered by exposing cells to cigarette smoke.
Virtually identical.
Yes.
But how is it physically causing that damage? What is the smoke doing to the actual architecture of the lung?
A 2021 mouse study published in the journal Scientific Reports detailed this beautifully. When the particulate matter from the incense hits the delicate lung tissue, it triggers the creation of reactive oxygen species, or ROS. You can think of this as severe localized oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress being that chemical imbalance where unstable molecules start attacking healthy cells.
Exactly. In the lungs, this oxidative stress specifically targets what biologists call tight junctions, or TJs, in our bronchial epithelial cells. If you picture the lining of your lungs as a sturdy brick wall designed to keep environmental toxins out of your delicate internal tissue, the tight junctions are the mortar between the bricks.
Okay, I follow. The mortar holding the wall together.
Right. They are constructed of highly specific proteins, namely Claudin-2 and ZO1. The heavy oxidative stress from the incense smoke literally dissolves that protein mortar.
It dissolves it.
Completely. When the Claudin-2 and ZO1 breakdown the wall fails, the barrier opens up, allowing toxins, heavy metals, and pollutants to flood deep into the underlying lung tissue.
So what does this all mean for a person sitting in their living room? I'm specifically thinking about kids growing up in these households. Did the data look at pediatric asthma or respiratory distress?
The real-world consequences are severe, particularly for children. The stack of sources includes a massive community survey conducted in Oman that looked at over 2,400 children. The researchers found that burning Bukhoor at home was the fourth most common trigger for pediatric asthma symptoms.
Fourth most common, out of everything.
Yes, ranking just behind household dust, sudden weather changes, and viral respiratory infection. For 38% of the asthmatic children in the study, simply being in the house when Bukhoor was burned immediately triggered their wheezing. The study also noted that if a family burned it more than twice a week, it tripled the child's overall risk of experiencing severe breathing distress.
Tripled the risk. That is heartbreaking. But surely standard asthma inhalers help manage those symptoms, right? That's what those medications are designed for.
That leads to one of the most alarming medical shockers in the laboratory data. The researchers tried to use standard heavy-duty asthma medications to stop that lung barrier damage in the lab.
Okay.
They applied inhaled glucocorticosteroids like budesonide and long-acting beta-2 agonists known as LABAs.
Which are the normal inhalers people carry around?
Exactly. These are the gold standard frontline treatments inside most commercial asthma inhalers.
And did they work?
They completely failed.
What?
Those standard medications did absolutely nothing to stop the incense smoke from breaking down the tight junctions. The mortar still dissolved.
That is terrifying.
It really is. However, the researchers then treated the cells with a specific antioxidant called NAC, or N-acetylcysteine. The NAC successfully protected the lungs and the barrier stayed intact.
So an antioxidant worked, but the asthma medicine didn't.
Right. This is incredible proof that the cellular damage caused by incense is fundamentally driven by oxidative stress, not a typical allergic histamine response. It requires an entirely different biological approach to mitigate than standard allergic asthma.
So your standard rescue inhaler might open up your airways a bit, but it is not stopping the physical structural damage the smoke is doing to your lung barrier. That is the acute short-term reality. But I have to imagine if someone is doing this every Friday for 20 years, the lungs don't just bounce back. What happens over decades of continuous exposure?
This is where we turn to the 2024 meta-analysis. This was a massive undertaking that synthesized data from 9 different case control studies across Asia, tracking long-term health outcomes.
And what did they find?
The researchers found a statistically significant 33% higher risk of developing lung cancer among individuals who were regularly exposed to indoor incense burning.
33% higher risk. But the breakdown of that data had a really strange gender divide, though, right?
It did. This raises an important question because the meta-analysis revealed a 40% increased risk of lung cancer, specifically in males exposed to the smoke. Curiously, they found no statistically significant association for females in this specific cancer dataset.
Wait, why would that be? Smoke is smoke. Lungs are lungs. Why would men be more vulnerable to this specific smoke?
It comes down to complex molecular biology and how our hormones interact with environmental pollutants. The leading scientific theory points to androgen receptors.
Okay.
Incense smoke contains extremely high levels of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. Within that group, there is a highly specific chemical compound released by incense called D-A.
Just rolls right off the tongue.
Right. When a man inhales this smoke, that specific D-A compound binds to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, which is a common byproduct of the male hormone testosterone.
So the smoke chemical essentially hitches a ride on the male hormone.
That combination creates a hyperactive molecule that aggressively targets and activates the androgen receptors, which are heavily present in the cells of male lungs.
Oh, wow.
When these receptors are constantly stimulated by this unique smoke hormone combo, it radically speeds up the cell division cycle. Faster cell division promotes rapid tumor growth and speeds up the progression of cancer. It is a highly specific biological vulnerability tied directly to the chemistry of the smoke.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. There is a documented cancer risk, but the research goes far beyond the lungs. The cardiovascular findings from the Singapore Chinese health study are incredible, just the scale of it.
Over 61,000 people.
Tracking them over many years to see how daily habits impact long-term mortality.
The methodology of the Singapore study is brilliant, and the cardiovascular findings were deeply concerning. They tracked these 61,000 individuals, categorized their daily incense habits, and then followed their medical records for over a decade.
And what were the numbers?
For people who reported using incense daily for over 20 years, there was a 12% higher overall risk of cardiovascular mortality. Digging deeper into those specific numbers, daily users faced a 19% higher risk of experiencing a stroke and a 10% higher risk of coronary heart disease.
Just from breathing the indoor air.
Yes. The constant daily inhalation of those ultrafine PM2.5 particles causes chronic systemic inflammation across the entire body. It slowly damages the blood vessels and degrades the heart muscle over time.
There is a massive paradox buried in that Singapore data, though.
Yes, there is.
If you ask someone who is most at risk for these heart issues from inhaling smoke, you would naturally assume it would be people who also smoke cigarettes, right? Because they are getting a double dose of pollution.
You would assume that, but the data shows the exact opposite.
Which is crazy.
The cardiovascular risk from daily incense exposure is actually much stronger in never smokers and former smokers than it is in current cigarette smokers.
That sounds completely backward. How does the non-smoker suffer more statistical damage?
It makes physiological sense when you look at baseline inflammation. A current smoker's vascular system is already so overwhelmed by the massive daily influx of toxins from tobacco that the addition of incense smoke adds very little measurable damage to their baseline.
So they're already maxed out.
Exactly. Their vascular system is already redlining. A non-smoker, however, has a relatively clean, highly functional vascular system. So when that non-smoker sits in a room with heavy indoor pollution from daily incense, their pristine system takes the full, unmitigated hit. The statistical jump in their risk for heart disease and stroke is much sharper because they're starting from a healthy baseline.
That is a harsh reality check. Now we have to acknowledge the reality of the world we live in here Incense and Bukhoor are not just novelty air fresheners. They are deeply, deeply embedded in global cultures. From the Middle East to Asia, offering Bukhoor is a profound symbol of hospitality.
Absolutely.
It's used for spiritual purification during prayer. It creates a fragrance signature for homes. I actually have a friend who bought this incredible vintage armchair from an estate sale, and for years her entire living room smelled faintly of frankincense and amber. It is a beautiful, comforting scent. People aren't going to just abandon their traditions because we're talking about particulate matter.
And they shouldn't necessarily have to abandon those traditions. Public health messaging in this space is notoriously difficult because you are dealing with sacred and highly social ties. You cannot just treat it like a public anti-smoking campaign.
Right. It's too intertwined with daily life and identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, the data strongly suggests we need to be highly protective of certain vulnerable groups who simply shouldn't be exposed to this level of heavy indoor smoke.
Pregnant women and infants definitely fall into that category.
The data is incredibly clear on maternal exposure. Studies conducted in Taiwan and China show that pregnant women exposed to heavy indoor incense burning face a significantly higher risk of hypertensive disorders during pregnancy.
And what about the babies?
Furthermore, their newborns are statistically more likely to have a lower birth weight. There's even emerging data linking maternal exposure to a higher risk of childhood obesity later in the child's life, possibly due to the dense smoke acting as an endocrine disruptor during fetal development.
What about the other end of the age spectrum?
The elderly are highly vulnerable. Chronic exposure to these ultrafine particles in older adults has been linked to accelerated cognitive decline and decreased overall brain connectivity. The particles cross the blood-brain barrier and cause neuroinflammation.
Wow.
And we absolutely cannot forget occupational exposure. Workers in temples, mosques, and commercial Bukhoor perfumeries are inhaling this dense smoke for 8 to 12 hours a day every single day.
That's a massive dose.
It is. Studies monitoring these specific workers show incredibly high rates of cellular DNA damage and permanently impaired lung capacity compared to the general public.
So we are definitely not saying ban incense. We are saying the current method of burning it in closed rooms is causing real harm. How do we actually fix this? Let's dive into some practical takeaways for you, the listener, to use in your own home.
If we connect all of this data to the bigger picture, the goal is practical harm reduction. We need smart, actionable changes to how we practice these traditions. First, and perhaps the single most impactful change you can make, ditch the charcoal.
Yes, swap it for an electric burner.
Electric burners are a fantastic modern solution. They heat the fragrant oils and the wood chips at a much lower, carefully controlled temperature without relying on an open flame or burning a chemical puck.
Which cuts out all that carbon monoxide we talked about.
Drastically reduces the emission of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide. It cuts out a massive portion of the toxicity before it even enters the air.
The second major step is ventilation. We live in these tightly sealed, climate-controlled modern houses. Do not trap the smoke inside.
Right. Open your windows.
Open your windows during and immediately after burning Bukhoor. Or if you have them run high-efficiency exhaust fans to physically pull the particulate matter outside. You can let the beautiful fragrance remain, but you have to vent the physical smoke.
Third, utilize modern air purifiers. If you burn incense regularly, you should be running HEPA filters in those rooms. Even better, the research points to bipolar air ionizers.
Wait, what exactly is a bipolar air ionizer? How does that work differently than a normal filter?
It is quite clever. Instead of just sucking air through a paper filter, a bipolar ionizer essentially releases charged atoms into the room.
Okay.
These charged ions seek out and attach themselves to the microscopic smoke particles floating in the air, making them heavy. The particles then clump together and drop to the floor, pulling them out of your breathing zone. The research shows that specific ionizers can reduce the PM 2.5 load in a room by up to 75%.
That is incredibly effective. And the fourth and final step is probably the simplest. Limit your exposure, reduce the frequency. You do not need to burn it all day, every day to keep the scent in your home.
Exactly. Keep the burners out of primary living spaces where you spend hours at a time, like your home office or your couch.
And you should never burn it in bedrooms, especially if children, elderly relatives, or anyone with asthma is sleeping there.
These are simple, highly effective behavioral modifications. They allow the cultural practice and the beautiful aromas to continue while drastically lowering the cumulative chemical burden you are placing on your lungs and your heart.
To summarize today's deep dive, incense and Bukhoor are beautiful ancient traditions that smell heavenly. But the science is absolutely clear. from a chemical standpoint, relying on glowing charcoal and smoldering wood indoors is effectively a form of passive smoking. It physically breaks down the protective barriers in your lungs, it carries long-term cardiovascular risks, and it demands a mindful, heavily ventilated approach.
By understanding the underlying chemistry of what is happening in the air, you gain complete control over your environment.
As someone who loves to be well-informed, you can now continue to enjoy these incredible cultural aromas while actively protecting your own cardiovascular and respiratory health, as well as the health of the friends and family you are welcoming into your home.
Absolutely.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final provocative concept pulled from our sources to mull over today. It builds directly on that idea of my friend's vintage armchair permanently smelling like amber and myrrh. It is the concept of third-hand smoke.
It's a really important concept to grasp.
The science shows that the particulate matter, the formaldehyde, the chemical PAH we talked about, they do not just magically vanish when the visible smoke clears and the air looks clean again. These microscopic particles are heavy. They embed themselves deep into your carpets, they cling to your curtains, they sink into the upholstery of your couch, and they even bond to the paint on your walls.
And then slowly they dissipate and revolatize back into the air for months, long after the burner is turned off.
So the next time you are sitting in your favorite cozy indoor space, take a look around the room and ask yourself how much of the comforting character or the scent of this room is actually just trapped chemical particulate matter that you are continuously breathing into your lungs right now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions and keep looking beneath the surface.